from the lucid fringe. Ravings from the lucid fringe. Musings from an unpasteurized life. Improvised on the front line of love and beauty. Welcome, I'm Semeric Yarrow. This week on Ravings from the Lucid Fringe, episode 57, Invading from Normandy, Expedition to Atlantica, part 5. Armorican Conquerors, Normandy and Brittany. Our time in the north of France is mostly for family gatherings, but perhaps also it's a time to see the more bucolic side of France, or the rough and ready farmer one. When Gascony and Uderzo described the village of indomitable Gauls from this French version of Up North, they usually ended up scrapping with each other. The writers weren't being completely original. When I mention going to Normandy to people, they say things like, "They're all drunk on Calvados," a kind of infamous local moonshine stroke apple brandy. We stopped in Normandy often, I'm sure, when I was a kid, but essentially saw it as moments to pass through on the way to warmer climes, or, infamously, as the location of an exciting 4-star campsite ruined by a thunderstorm, where we ended up sleeping in the car after the tents collapsed. This time we will really explore it, though aware that this is another of those places where historic warfare is writ large, possibly writ larger than anywhere else on the planet, given that Normandy played such a central role in both 20th century world wars and hadn't exactly been peaceful before that. I mean, the French didn't invite those original Norman Vikings over for an aperitif. There's noisy strimming over the road when I reach my partner Joanna's parents' home. A neighbour is in the process of taking over a house she's finally inherited after an interminable and apparently typically French bit of legal will wrangling. Now she's wrangling with something different, which I will see plenty of in Northern Europe this summer: brambles and nettles. The temperature is pleasant rather than the heat of Paris and the south. The landscape more like Devon than anything starker, and it's cider country. It's known as La Suisse Normande, Swiss Normandy, which is exaggerating things a bit, but there are some lovely cliffs and valleys to be explored. My first sights, though, were the Normandy beaches on a beautiful warm afternoon. Ouistreham, from where you can see the ferry over to the big island I was born on. These beaches are somewhat morbidly the top tourist attractions round here, memories our families have no direct connections with, though I'm sure they cement the general links between Britain and the north of France. D-Day was far from the first time troops had landed on either side of the Channel. Today the water is calm, the waves gentle and rolling. The temperature, a long way north of my last swims in Spain, still rather warmer than Musenberg at this time of year. It's nice to land in a little ordinariness. There are cars parked for many blocks back. It's a long weekend and nice weather, so fair enough. Then I'm driven on busy French roads until we arrive at the tiny village that is our destination. The next day we can use bicycles instead, much more classique. There's a long, winding route along the side of the River Orne, which cuts along what was once a railway line. It claims to go all the way to La Rochelle, more than 500 kilometres away. We aren't going that far, just along paths where there are places to look at the river and the trees, the rocks, the old mills, the summer flowers. Another day I head for a walk with Joanna along tracks beside fields, and sometimes cutting through them in a daring traverse that avoids angry farm owners, who are luckily out at other fields, and also luckily it's not hunting season. Familiar sights connect with the recesses of my memory. Oak, beech, holly. The gardens are generally full of colourful hydrangeas, or hortensias, as they're often known here, a word I personally have only heard from a Quentin Blake children's book set in France. Zoria and I have been watching them pop up abundantly throughout the trip, but round here they're especially vivid and visible. My father stays in a cottage that is all violet, perhaps partly in honour of all the fruit and flowers. Brilliantly, mischievously violet, prepared by a visual artist. I've always loved purple myself, so I'm a little jealous. Even a retouched photo of the area with purple hay bales. The brambles have begun to ripen their berries very early this year. Indeed, throughout Normandy, Britain, and Ireland, I will discover the delights again of blackberries, which are ridiculously abundant this July and August. Weeks later, my father's friend will even prepare a crumble while I'm staying with him. Perhaps it's the land trying to tempt me to give living up here another go, but the pull back home to South Africa is too strong in the end, berries or not. Of course, one thing I first tasted in France were myrtilles, blueberries, my favourite morning treat in the Cape, and not so abundant in the moist, damp north. But there are plenty of other treats to be had here, thanks to family who know how to find good regional French delights of the nature of wine and cheese and good things like that. We pass a number of local chateaux, not quite on the international tourist circuit, and some possibly even still functioning as lords of the manor type places. France's revolution went back and forth a number of times. Some lords lost their heads, others remained canny aristocrats who still keep their domain. Hunting and shooting used to be as big around here as in the south of Spain, but with these cliffs and the river, one of the big things instead is now paragliding and water sports. There's a little theatre here too, though perhaps less highbrow than what's happening in Avignon at this time of year. An equestrian show with a story thrown in. And then there's medieval discovery experiences all over the place for the kids. Joanna's will head up to the Festiland theme park one day soon, but not quite the most over-the-top and French one of all. That's not Disneyland Paris, which isn't remotely French, or even Parc Astérix, but Puy du Fou. An English friend will take his son soon to the Spanish branch of this, but it's a French idea in origin. Totally authentique, historical experiences with all the cultural sophistication and detailed historical research thrown in. Sounds pretty wild if you can't get enough with your own imagination, just being still, in one of the many monuments still standing. Or if you can't find peace on a walk. The crests of the hills here have been turned in the tourist literature into a walking circuit, though wild camping is still a discretionary practice. Little food stops are popping up because in these secular times Europeans' pilgrimage back to nature is beginning to root into new locations. We stop and take a look at a lovely spa set in another historic chateau. If there isn't broad agreement on what to do with these old buildings, unlike the Spanish paradors, then generally you can bet that the French won't just leave them to rot, but will figure out how to take them into something with a bit more pizzazz. That's even the case in Caen. The biggest city in the west of Normandy was badly bombed at the end of the war, but you can't easily tell from our final night viewpoint looking out from the castle. The reconstruction was made, it appears, by general architectural agreement, and although there are one or two 70s monsters around, it basically looks rather smart. And all the ecclesiastical buildings are up and giving off medieval power vibes. Before we get to Caen, however, there's one more adventure I'm on with my daughter Zoria and with my parents. Through a couple of peaceful green stream and bridge picnic stops and via the most famous site around here, Mont Saint-Michel. We see the rock clearly across a wonderful field of lavender, probably more picturesquely than the hordes of tour buses are doing. When I was 7, I visited the English equivalent, St. Michael's Mount in Cornwall, so I do have a sense of what we're looking at. The Cornish one was accessed via a causeway, which we walked over at low tide, before entering the alleys of a religious fortress and lots of pretty architecture. This one has a rather grander history. When Henry V of England invaded France during the 100 Years' War, the monks of Mont Saint-Michel refused to surrender, and although the English besieged them, they never gave in. It was the Archangel Michael, of course, who then appeared to Joan of Arc in her visions, and did the vital work of re-inspiring the French to unite against the invaders. Equally intriguingly, there's a Michael line, which directly joins a series of monasteries dedicated to Michael, stretching from Skellig Michael off the coast of Ireland, through the Cornish and Norman monasteries, to Italian ones, a Greek one, and finally Mount Carmel in Israel, founded by Elijah in the Old Testament, who was, according to legend, given his strength for battle by Michael. The most boring and weakest argument I've heard for why high places are named for Michael is that he's an angel, so they must be up near heaven. Certainly a lot of the founding legends on the route involve his appearance on high to whichever bishop or saintly bloke needed a little encouragement. The other piece is that they tended to be pagan sanctuaries already, and in fact the line follows the path of the Northern Hemisphere summer solstice sunset. The images of Michael generally have him as an inspiring heavenly warrior. He wields a flaming sword, and one theme of this legendary line suggests that this is the arc through which his sword goes when combating evil. And an Italian physicist from Heidelberg University, having analysed the locations in depth, suggests that this didn't all happen by accident, which is quite enough encouragement for me to indulge more in this particular land meets spirit story. In fact, there's a fresh image of Michael at the cathedral in St. Malo. We've now crossed into Little Britain, Bretagne, with the bigger Grande Bretagne on the other side of the sleeve, La Manche, which the English call the English Channel. The British often misinterpret this simple geographical destination to mean that their country is somehow great compared to others. Brittany was essentially an independent duchy for much of the medieval period, with its own language related to Cornish and Welsh, though much of that has been squished by the centralising French state. And the southwest of Brittany is called Cornouailles. In many medieval tales, including Parzival, Brittany and Cornwall and Wales are all somehow linked by land, and Arthur's roving court can be found in any of the three areas. Saint Malo himself, we're told by the friendly tour guide that accosts us when we enter the cathedral, was Cornish. Back in the first millennium, lots of would-be pilgrims, travellers, explorers came with their version of the new faith. The Celtic Church operated under these independent, wild saints for a long time, until the Pope pulled them into line and told them he was boss, basically. So I'm naturally more inclined to enjoy their view of things. San Marlo Cathedral today is an intriguing blend, having had all its windows blasted out in World War II. The new stained glass is attractive and abstract, and there's a sequence of modern Christian paintings, including a spectacular one of Michael leading the host at the apocalypse, by a contemporary artist. It's really intriguing and refreshing to see these images, that we've been seeing all over the Catholic West, reinterpreted in the light of more recent artistic styles and innovation. A little like in Madrid, but San Marlo is a much smaller place and the church much more approachable. There's also a tribute in the church to Jacques Cartier, which is a bit embarrassing for my liberal Canadian relatives when I tell them. Cartier was basically a French corsair/pirate working for the state, as per Francis Drake, etc. He bent a knee here and was blessed by the local bishop before heading off to attack the Native Americans in Quebec. Outside, on the walls, there's a whole section of Quebec flags with a statue of him heading off, and a number of statues to other naval commanders. Saint-Malo was a pretty exposed citadel when the French and the British and the Dutch were squabbling. The walls are so thick that there's a broad walkway right around the top of them, encircling the old town, and all the little islets offshore have other old military compounds built on them. The walls are also thick, though, because as at Mont Saint-Michel down the coast, Saint-Malo gets struck at times by absolutely massive tides. You wouldn't know today when I head down to the beach for a dip into the turquoise waters. A little further out is a mobile diving platform that kids are leaping off. It's all rather cosy. Like the north of Spain, Brittany has its own long history of sailing communities. Those French marinier tops, white with blue stripes, are all the fashion as they have been for however long. One guy wearing one comes to entertain us with his accordion and his old Breton songs, for this is probably the most famous region for French folk. We also drive south to Dinan, which is where I am faced with some pretty intense parking challenges after some pretty intense parking prices already in Saint-Malo. The hire car we've got is a little too much of a nanny state vehicle for my liking. It beeps at me if I go mildly over what it thinks is the speed limit, which it sometimes gets wrong, and it positively shouts at me if I show any signs of getting too close to a soft verge or a dangerous leaf. Filling the car up here involves self-service to the max. Not only do I have to put the petrol in myself, I have to insert my credit card to get the thing to work in the first place and pay up front. It's a little worrying, but it seems to go through fine. But then the main car parks in Dinan are closed for an unexpected festival. Regional festivities seem to be as much of a thing as they were in Spain. And then there's the Breton language, which the centralising French government has done its best to stamp out, but it seems to be making a pesky comeback. It can be seen in the far Breton, a kind of butter cake with prunes, and the rather delicious cuisine amane, spelt K-O-U-I-G-N, and then A-M-A-N-N, which we buy from a shop called Steve McCruin. Get it? Breton butter is made with salt, thank goodness, as I've been missing it in the usual French version. And all this butteriness is definitely making me think of Devon and Cornwall yet again. However, Dinan's centre, once I can get into it to meet the fam and enjoy a cup of herbal tea, is one of those magical medieval towns full of timber frame buildings that look today like they should be a movie set. Many of the buildings have not just elegant old slate, which we saw in Normandy too, but perfectly conical roofing, seemingly a very Breton thing. There are plenty of bees around, and we've experienced wasps too. They seem to be a North European summer thing, because in Spain we didn't really encounter them. I was once stung by one in an English August, and ended up getting an adrenaline injection as I swelled up rather balloonishly, so I'm a little wary of them, though I think I put my immune system under a lot less pressure these days, and when a South African wasp went for me a decade ago, nothing too hectic happened. Anyway, we don't let them get to our Breton sweets, but we do head back home to Saint-Malo after our little outing for a slightly interrupted last night. As in Paris, there are shouts in the night outside, this time revellers emerging drunk from nightclubs. We seem to have reached the zone for that northern European pastime, even if they're not swigging Calvados. Our return to Normandy takes us via Bayeux, the cathedral city close to Caen. Caen itself has two great abbeys visible on its horizon, one for hommes and one for femmes. That's because Guillaume the Bastard, William the Conqueror of 1066 fame, married his third cousin once removed, and the Pope insisted he build these abbeys as a penance. He was buried in the one for men until his remains were removed and tossed around during the French Revolution, though they did find one limb and rebury it. Amen. A few centuries earlier, Henry V of England rather pointedly came and paid him homage there during his 100 Years' War conquest of Normandy, doing the whole thing rather in reverse. Anyway, Bayeux Cathedral has pretty spires, but obviously our voyage round all 70 metres of the tapestry is the real reason for stopping off. It's a remarkable piece, and it's in Bayeux because William's equally thuggish brother Odo happened to be the bishop there and probably commissioned it, while the Duke was based nearby in Caen. Rather gruesome and intense scenes mixed with more light-hearted ones, and the whole thing is embroidered in vivid detail when seen close up. Recent artists have called it the first comic strip, which flattens it rather too much. I know that comic strips take a long time for individuals to draw by hand, but 70 metres of embroidery is a different order of attentiveness. Outside, there's a watermill working and other signs of restored medievalness that are becoming familiar here in the north. The sky is also grey for a while, which tends to be how I imagine medieval northern Europe, though from here we can spend a sunny late afternoon at the castle in Caen, which I recognise rather stirringly, though I've never been here before. I've never really paid much attention to Caen's past, which is surprising given how important it is and how I studied medieval English history as one course at university. When Edward III kicked off the 100 Years' War, this is the place he came across to lay siege to first. The origin point for the French-speaking English kings claims to the French throne. The English city I grew up in and am about to visit again for the first time in 16 years has a castle and a cathedral, both faced with Caen stone. And here's the original. Magnificent yellowish rock quarried locally that's coated the castle of the Dukes of Normandy, literally Viking bastards with manifestly more power than the French kings at the time. It's enormous, as is the moat around it. There's a pretty little Norman church in the grounds. The complex is managed with French style. A jongleur is busking in the entrance gate, playing medieval chansons. Charming, as is the Rodin sculpture, and the Chinese sculptures flying high above the restaurant, and the flat perspective bust that tricks the eye. There's a wedding above the restaurant with live jazz. One of the guests invites Joanna and me to take a little look and listen. We descend from the castle to eat at a slightly weird Indian restaurant. French style, with a lot of nuts, a lot of mixed subtle flavours, and less spice than we might normally ask for. The rose lassi sounds interesting, but is kind of a pink milkshake. Our last evening in France is coming to a close, and as we board the Mont Saint-Michel ferry, we are leaving the city behind that has the amusingly named Conquerors as its soccer team. Amusing because I've not really heard of Caen winning the French championships lately. Past glories, I guess. And so, like William way back when, we board the boat and cross the channel at night. The trip is a little too short to really enjoy. At 5 a.m. the piped music comes on for sunrise, which we can't see, although I head with Zoria onto the deck to have a go. England, predictably enough, is cloudy, and it's drizzling. A smaller island, the Isle of Wight, is over on our left, and Portsmouth Harbour approaches. We're about to enter our fourth country in Atlantica, where people drive on the left and will need pound coins, and they still talk about miles, which seem interminable when you're used to kilometres. Somewhere we've both been to before, but a very long time ago. The journey continues. Centuries of chalk and cheese. Ancient moments in southern England. In Portsmouth, waiting for the train, we grabbed a few things to eat from a corner shop. When we said, "Hi, how are you?" to the shop assistant, she seemed confused at such a personal question and struggled to answer it. Later, another service worker replied with, "Fine, thanks, and you?" in the most bored-with-life monotone I've ever heard. I'm doing my best to stay open to what England has to offer, although perhaps inevitably, as we fully understand the lingo, we're likely to be more critical than we have been so far. I've also read a lot more about English current affairs, but then that might not help. I found the French much friendlier and less stressed out than international commentators, insisting on a state in crisis and looking for clicks, tend to punt. And I'm going to have in-depth conversations over the next weeks with many old friends who continue to live in England and try to thrive. What might be most interesting is to come in afresh, to see with a soul tempered a little by the 6 weeks I've been elsewhere in Atlantica. And one of the first things we see is wildlife. 3 foxes in the grey morning scurrying around next to the railway line. This is a hint that in spite of aspects of the culture that jar, and the bad weather, and the high cost of most things, I will have a good time in England. While we were in Brittany, I took the time to look at the map for old sacred sites. Asterix books are full of dolmens and menhirs after all, so there surely would be some, and I wasn't disappointed. Carnac, down in Cornouailles, is the largest megalithic complex of standing stones going, dwarfing, say, Stonehenge. And there's a few standing stones in the centre of the Brittany Peninsula which bear names like Merlin's Seat and host the Fountain of Life. One day, perhaps. However, the actual megalithic visits I take on in this expedition are all going to be on the British Isles. Planning, and not being particularly attached to particular results, help make England more fun. Driving through southern England doesn't. Though at least I get a genuinely cute little hire car that isn't unhelpfully upgraded, and it can cope pretty well with narrow English lanes and people hurtling down them. I once stop for a pee in what I think is a tiny unmarked country road, and 5 cars come past before I can escape from the hedgerow. There are, according to one friend, 42 million cars on English roads designed for 20 million, and most of those seem to be in the south. It's the first time I've felt claustrophobia in rural areas. It is, to be fair, the first time I've really driven in southern England, apart from a crazy mission in my 20s to deliver a bunch of vinyl records into central London. But that was less pressured than this seems to be, and the fact that the Google Maps lady has suddenly started saying, "Turn left in 1,000 feet," whatever the hell that means, is not helping. However, what I do notice is that driving really helps me to see a whole lot of the country I never noticed when I actually lived here, because it wasn't on the train lines that were my only route around the place as a young man. There are little hills and woodland roads in Dorset I drive through while knowing nothing of. Quaint little villages nowhere near a rail line. I'm not a super fan of the combustion engine, so maybe if there's a next time I come, I should bring a bike and take it real slow, like my mother's boyfriend did when I was a teenager, cycling from Norfolk to Glastonbury, for example. Glastonbury. Home to one of the world's most infamous mud and litter-filled festivals, which I don't want to go to, but also a unique town. It's unique because it's home to perhaps England's most revered sacred sites. English and sacred are often antagonistic adjectives these days, but here we are, in a site that Henry VIII tried to bulldoze and didn't quite manage. I have a strange sense looking at the ruined magic that is Glastonbury Abbey. Perhaps the arrogant destruction of monasteries and centres of learning by one of history's most infamous bastards has actually allowed, 5 centuries later, all kinds of unexpected cultural wildflowers to flourish that would previously have been banished weeds. There's murals on some of the walls of the town that recall Mexico more than anything else, not least because of the presence of magic mushroom imagery which also appears in shop windows. The shops are extraordinary. English high streets have often had one hippie or head-type shop with incense and tarot cards. Glastonbury's high street is literally nothing but this. Crystal specialists next to breathwork clinics, next to tarot and inner work shops. It's like a hippie festival, I've been to a fair few, has taken over the permanent high street. Even the computer shop is zen. To reach the High Street I walk from a car park and via St John the Baptist's church. This is a little odd in itself. There's a sign on the gate saying, essentially, that the grounds will be locked for 30 days because you guys can't stop taking drugs here. Inside is a slightly yellowing lawn with a small labyrinth and a thorn tree, related to the famous one in the Abbey grounds, which you can get cuttings of. It's famous because Joseph of Arimathea, the disciple of Jesus, who legends say brought the Holy Grail to Avalon in Britain, brought this with him too as a staff, but in particular because it flowers twice annually, with buds at Christmas as well as the more normal time near Easter. Rather like the figs I'd met in the south of Spain, though versions of this one keep getting attacked for some nefarious reason, presumably. In the church are two black marble unmarked tombs on either side of the altar. The reason Glastonbury became such a popular and successful abbey before Henry VIII's thugs came along is that it was claimed in the High Middle Ages that the tombs of Arthur and Guinevere had been found there, and now it's claimed that they were secretly moved here to the parish church when the abbey was attacked. They're certainly mysterious items, whatever they may contain. This rather makes up for the distinctly down-to-earth aspects of the church elsewhere. There's a guy in the porch with a little scraggy dog on a lead that is actually a piece of string, who possibly got lost at Glastonbury Festival in the late 80s and is still hanging around, except that he welcomes me into the church, where numerous similarly weird and wonderful people are chatting that I wouldn't normally associate with the High Church. There's a medieval painting of the crucifixion in a chapel altar, under which is a soft toy purple dinosaur and a unicorn, both apparently set up as a scene and reading the Bible. I come out and walk the labyrinth, feeling a little out of time and place, remembering that injunction to Alice to choose your direction. Soon after choosing it, I see a mural of Alice. This is trippy. The Abbey is grand, and it's my first time experiencing the magic of a church ruin. Where the windows would have been, there's instead a view of the skyline, alongside the kind of Romanesque arches and details in the crypts that must once have looked more like the riches of Spain. The English tradition in these non-believing times seems to be to emphasize the daily life aspects of a monastery rather more, with a whole touch-taste opportunity in the remnants of the monastery kitchen and a rather impressive vegetable patch. I wander further around the town towards what is perhaps the most magical bit of Glastonbury for me, the Chalice Well. There are in fact two wells, a red stream and a white one that I don't get to. Here's a spring that reminds me of, well, Hogsback in the Eastern Cape, strangely. Fairy forms, earth spirits, the consciousness of the land. One sign I read later suggests that the hill the spring emerges from is full of feminine energy, while the adjoining hill, on top of which is Glastonbury Tor, is masculine. I reach the edge of the spring itself and find myself sitting into a delicious field of energy. It's so thick you can almost hear it. Others are there and others come. Nobody talks. It's evident to me that there is a clarity of the energy here that is relaxing, calming, welcoming, grounding. It takes me a really long time to move when I've been on a buzz-go all day. And when I do move, it's almost as if I'm fully renewed. I stride rapidly up the Tor to the tower on top, which is itself a most unusual thing. Only the tower was reconstructed after a freak 13th century earthquake shook apart the previous complete church, and again after the Reformation, when the abbot of Glastonbury was hanged here by the aforementioned King Henry's thugs. Dedicated, of course, to Michael, the archangel who somehow gets to be a saint too, who we met before on a high place in Normandy. But if the hill and the remaining tower is rather dramatically masculine, there's definitely a sheltering place here for the feminine. Women are singing sacred songs inside it when I arrive, and I find myself adding a little bass. It's good to bring music up here to the winds. Whatever the stories, and there are many, including those of the wonderfully wacky new British Druid movement, it's definitely good to be a pilgrim here in my own way. Ready for a descent, and a race across country to meet a friend by a swan-filled river in a beer garden that has a great range of 0% ale options. I'd actually started my little exploration of this sacred land of the south the day before on Dartmoor with Joanna. The famous hinges and standing stones in the west of the country had their equivalent in the east, but given the lack of big rock on that side, they were made of wood, and we only found out about them in recent times, when changing tidal patterns revealed some that had been preserved on shorelines. So, after we'd spent some days in the eastern city I grew up in, I was excited to look at the better preserved special places of the west. We had driven out to find one of the many stone circles on the moor, in the July early morning, before any Sunday crowds had arrived. Only the sheep and, a lone camper were there before us. Wild camping is permitted these days on Dartmoor. The circle had a central, natural-looking dip in it, where an altar had been made of flowers and feathers and grass from the surroundings and ash and other temporarily meaningful items. These natural dips, supposedly, seem to be a feature of these pretty obviously central focal points for altars. There's clearly some people beginning to rediscover what we do in Africa all the time, finding temples in the landscape for fire and sacred ceremony. What is also clear, however, is that the record of all these stones and monuments is really incomplete. In many ways it's utterly extraordinary that so much remains. This is especially so when you see all the dry stone walls and paths around, and figure how tempting it must have been in previous centuries to just take a stone or two and use it for something more utilitarian and agricultural, in the times when the church was the one sacred place allowed. We visited the massive complex at Merivale, where there are ceremonial corridors. Who knows if these were once lined with wooden structures, bright cloths, other natural colours? The stones are what remains, and they are artwork in and of themselves, and through them we can see, like at the ruined abbey, what a sacred landscape lies beyond. Honouring the land from a kind of human container. Sure, there may be star maps and portals and dreaming spaces too, but the land connection is the beginning, full as it may be of forms of consciousness we have lost touch with. We lay down and felt it. I walked over to an obelisk, standing and pointing the way to another stone circle. Then there were small pits covered over with stones at particular points along the journey the stones led us on. I climb inside one and feel even closer to the earth's heartbeat. These are the kind of things that, on a bigger scale, get called burrow tombs or passage tombs by archaeologists. It's very true that at some, like the big one at West Kennet, I later explored with my archaeologist friend Matt in Wiltshire, skeletons were found. If you dug up churches, you'd find plenty of skeletons too, but that doesn't make the churches tombs. It just means this was a sacred place, a ceremonial place that people connected with so much that they wanted to be buried here, for whatever reason, even sacrifice, their culture may have resonated with. Joanna and I continued our little exploration of the moor with a trip to St. Michael de Rupe on top of Brentor. I previously mentioned the Sword of Michael line going from Ireland to Italy to Israel via Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy. This little church lies, according to those who tune into such things, on a rather different line, a ley line of Michael that extends from Cornwall up to Bury St Edmunds in Suffolk. It's flanked by another ley line, the line of Mary, and the two lines apparently dance together at Glastonbury, unsurprisingly. I can't vouch for these particular stories of the energies of the land. I can say that the tranquillity at the little church of Brentor was rather a special thing to discover in the morning. I would also visit Burrow Mump, one of those lovely, bizarre English rural names, which actually refers to another Michael church on a hill southwest of Glastonbury, these days filled with the pungent smell of sheep dropping and a slightly eerie view of the sky and the land of Somerset all around us. Somerset is dairy farming country, famously, and Wiltshire to the east is a big chalk plain. For centuries they've been known as different places, chalk and cheese. I would have another walk in lovely Somerset on another day, remarkably close to the big city of Bristol. Gorges and cliffs, and the woodland landscape I was getting used to, as well as a little exploration of caves. On that walk my friend explained that the cave we were descending was one of the early victims of modern tourism shop practice. Stalactites were removed from here by a Victorian entrepreneur to reduce its visiting value and stuck artificially onto a less interesting cave elsewhere in the region, where Cheddar Gorge is the most famous ancient thing to explore. We found a little path into a glade where there was a different kind of nature altar. A lime atop a bottle of whisky beside a wild fireplace, looking rather damp when we arrived. People find their ways to escape the urban and mundane, it seems, with a million forms of religion we may never understand. Our conversation turned to modern rituals, rites of passage, ways of supporting modern humans in reconnecting with the land. From Brentor the previous Sunday, Joanna and I meandered from west to east, via rivers and the sweet town of Tavistock and little bits of woodland, England's wildest, where there were once golden eagles, now relegated to the true wilds of the Scottish north. The rural claustrophobia I mentioned seems also to often apply to England's national parks. By the time we left Dartmoor, the top of Hay Tor was beginning to look like the Eiffel Tower. It was a greyish mild Sunday in the summer vacation, but still what remains of England's wildlife is facing an ongoing battle against human footprints by the look of it. Sanctuary places like these stone circles and ancient churches are part of a different, gentler way of being with the landscape, I think. Before we really reached the crowds, however, we stopped for Devon cream tea, which we may have inadvertently eaten the Cornish way. I'm told there's such rivalry over whether to put jam first like the Cornish or cream first like Devonians that signs like "Cream First" are waved at sports competitions. This was in Widdicombe in the Moor, which has another church that suffered strange tempests. In this case, ball lightning from the devil, or some such story, dating back to the 17th century, which didn't destroy the lovely medieval rood screen, one of the few that remain, as Cromwell seems to have particularly enjoyed getting his troops to smash these on their Puritan rampages. It was peaceful that day, but the bees were out and about. At least I think they were bees. They might have been wasps, which I find again later in the week at a very different location, Blenheim Palace in Woodstock, Oxfordshire. Not exactly the same as Woodstock in Cape Town, our city's oldest industrial suburb and meeting point of many classes and cultures, but the English original has got its own slightly bizarre upmarket charm. That's where an old friend of mine walks her dogs. I might not have made it to any of the Spanish early modern palaces or to Versailles, but Blenheim is the English equivalent, even though the current version is more aristocratic than royal. Vast, planned, with a lake and follies and things, and grand courtyards, and lots of international tourists in coaches, and a spot for a glass of water on an unusually warm English afternoon. Built for the Duke of Marlborough, one of those serious colonial bastards from the wars of the 18th century and destroyer of Irish hopes, which is another story, though the previous version of the country house held queens. Today, if you're with a local canine owner, you can get free entrance to the grounds through the back gate. Presumably in the past, if not today, there were plenty of horses going through the gates of Blenheim. There are bits of Oxfordshire where equestrianism is a big thing still, and the English version has tended to be incredibly linked to the wealthy in recent centuries. In shamanic terms and indigenous understanding across many cultures, horses are linked with power. This is not at all surprising when you look at the history of what people have done who've had horses to ride, but it goes deeper than that, into a sense for the animal and its special intensity, into power with more than just power over. And so I make it to the Uffington White Horse, an ancient chalk masterpiece. Who knows really how long this has been here? There are plenty of other hillside figures marked in the chalky bits of England, but they tend to be inspired by or imitations of this one. Down below on Dragon Hill is another little bit of chalk where nothing grows, and legend has St. George attacking the dragon here and its fire breath burning the spot. It's all been here a very long time, and it is close to a very old road, the Ridgeway, and hawthorns that I'm beginning to identify, Northern Europe's magical trees, and also to Wayland's smithy. That's a barrow, which has romantically been given the name of an old Saxon god related to Thor, but it's likewise much older than that particular group of island invaders. There are layers of stories to work through or shake off in order to get at the mystery. I'm gifted a magical moment of my own at Wayland's smithy, entering the sanctuary after circling the great long mound. The rocks that front it are absolutely enormous, like the Sarsens covering the front of West Kennet Barrow that I'll see later that week. I have time to pray, to sing, to wail, and to meditate. Before my arrival there were other tourists. As I prepared to leave, more came. But it's as if I was allowed my time to connect with the earth's energy in this place. It wouldn't be the last time I had such an experience on this trip. I have to enter these places foolishly, like Alice, because I know little of the people who made them or the reasons for their creation, so I just have to be present, to be still, even amidst the overwhelming humanity of the south of England. So, thank you for listening to this latest episode in the series, and you can find all of my articles and my recordings at lucidfringe.substack.com, except my music and poetry from the past, which is all available at simrickyarrow, all one word, .bandcamp.com, and the background recordings and sounds that you will have heard are all either from those recordings or they are my own. Please do give this a rating if it's on your podcast app. Please spread the word if you enjoy what you hear, and if you want to give me some feedback or commentary, of course I'm very open to that. Any suggestions for future episodes? Okay, enjoy. See you next time. Ravings from the Lucid Fringe. Ravings from the Lucid Fringe. Musings from an unpasteurized life. Improvised on the front line of love and beauty.